Hello, welcome to my channel. My name is Jenny. I'm from Jennycarddesigns. My YouTube channel contains content that is intended to share paper crafting tutorials and inspiration with all of you. I hope that you enjoy. Okay, today's video is going to showcase a very specific product. I picked this up from Glitter and Ink in Belleville. If you look in the description below, you'll find a link to their website and a discount code for 10% off of your orders of $50 or more. Some restrictions that apply to the discount code. So if you're interested in anything at the Glitter and Ink store, I encourage you to check it out and use that code that's listed in the description down below. So moving into today's video, this is the Ton Alpha Stamp and Die collection. Now this is an extra large layering set to create the alphabet with these beautiful florals inside of it, and it's a 5-step stamp and it comes with 42 greetings inside of the set. These are high quality photopolymer stamps. I bought the bundle, which comes with the coordinating cover die plate as well, and it cuts out all of the letters in one shot, which saves you a ton of time. Let's take this baby out for a test run. So we'll need to cut up some cardstock so that we can stamp these out on, and I'm just measuring this stamp, and I need some pieces that measure 6 by 6. So I'm just going to cut out a whole bunch of those so that I can make a bunch of these alphabets at one time. I figure once I've got everything sort of laid out, I might as well make a bunch and have them on hand for future projects. So I take a little bit of washi tape and put it underneath my MISTI mat just so that the mat doesn't move around. And then I take a little bit of repositionable tape and stick that to my MISTI mat and put my 6 by 6 cardstock piece on top of that. So I'm going to grab the stamp set, and I'm going to start with the first layer, which is the ABC outline. And if you'll notice on the stamp set, there are these little sort of black boxes or rectangles. Once you stamp it, you'll see that those stamp as well, and those are your keys. Those are your lineup points where you want to take the next stamp to line up the pieces and make sure everything layers together nicely. So another thing I want to point out is to make sure that you remove the air bubbles, because these are such a large stamp. There can get some air bubbles in behind, and you want to make sure you get those out before you start stamping. So I just took a dry cloth and I wiped down my stamp, and then I used my hand and sort of rubbed over it just to condition it to get it ready to stamp. And then I've got some Jennycarddesigns premium dye ink here. This is the slate color, and I'm going to ink up my stamp, and then I'm going to press nice and good, giving some good firm even pressure, and then I'm going to stamp this a couple of times to make sure that I get a nice dark solid impression. And every time you stamp, make sure that your cardstock is repositioned in the corner of your MISTI, just to make sure that you don't make any mistakes here. And I cleaned up my stamp, and I'm going to get ready for the next layer. So I stamped 4 of these just in case I made any mistakes on the first round. I want to make sure that I have extras. So I'm going to line that cardstock up into the corner of my MISTI and stick it down to that tape and grab the second layer. So this is where you're going to see how to line it up. Now you've got those little markings there on the left and the right to kind of show you where to line up. So zooming in nice and close so that you get a really good look at what I'm doing here, I'm taking those little rectangles here on the right and the left, and I'm lining them up with the black rectangles already stamped on my cardstock. So once they sort of land into position, I like to take a look at some of the alphabets as well and the little floral images to see if they're lining up in the right spot as well. Take a note at the letter Q down here in the bottom left corner. You'll see that little floral element is not quite lined up with the Q. So I like to just make sure that that's going to be in the right spot too, because sometimes when you pull it off, you can kind of stretch it a bit. So you just want to make sure that all of these things line up. So I like to take a look at that letter Q and make sure that that's in the right spot. And I feel like that's a good starting point. So again, I make sure there are no air bubbles in my stamp, and I grab the Hero Arts Passion Flower ink, and I'm going to ink up this stamp nice and good. And again, I'm going to stamp this a couple of times to make sure I get a nice dark impression. And then I do this 4 times for all of my alphabets. Here's a close-up look at what we've got so far. Okay, let's move on to the next layer. We took off the stamp, and we're going to move over to the second sheet and grab the third layer to the set on the second sheet. And we're going to use those little squares and line it up as well. And now this is the detail that goes into the little flowers. So it's pretty easy to line up using the squares, and then just keeping an eye on that letter Q again to make sure that the detail sort of lands in the right spot on the flower. And pick it up with the MISTI, making sure to remove any air bubbles. Don't forget to condition your stamps as well, just sort of wiping them down, making sure they're ready to take the ink. And then here I've got Jennycarddesigns Wild Lilac ink, and I will ink that up nice and good and give some good firm even pressure and press that down onto my letters. And this is turning out to be so beautiful. I love the color purple, and this is really starting to look great. Here's a close-up look of what these flowers look like after the third layer. Okay, and now let's move on to the fourth layer. So we're going to do the exact same thing, making sure everything's clean. I got a lot of ink on my hands at this point, so you want to make sure that you're not transferring any ink. Let's do the fourth layer now. This is the leaves. This is going to be like the first layer of foliage around your flowers. So I'm usually going back to the first panel that I stamped because that ink is nice and dry by this point. I like to give the ink sort of time to set into the paper so that it doesn't mix together or anything. I like to have nice crisp stamped layers. And we're going to line up using the keys on the left and the right, double checking on that letter Q, making sure that everything looks good and lined up. And just sort of, tweak it a little bit if you need to make sure that it lands in place where it's supposed to be. It doesn't have to be perfect, but I really like it to be spot on. I'm going to spend the time making these a bunch of times. I like to make sure that everything is exactly where it's supposed to be. Making sure you put your cardstock back into the corner each time, pressing it back into that repositionable tape. We don't want to make any errors at this point. We've come way too far. So now I'm going to condition my stamp, and I'm going to ink up using my Jennycarddesigns Jelly Bean Green ink. So make sure that you get all of your air bubbles out, ink up your stamp, and there is our first layer of foliage. And now we're moving into the very last layer. So the last layer comes in two pieces, and there's one piece on each page of your stamp set. You'll find the left part of the stamp on the second page and the right part of the stamp on the first page. I hope that made sense. So we're going to line it up using the little squares in the rectangle. And then again, taking a look at the floral elements to make sure they're lined up in the right spot. And you can stamp these at the same time. It doesn't have to be separate. It's only laid out separately on the sheets for packaging purposes so that everything fits together. So we'll do the same thing. We'll line it up, and my crazy hair is sticking into the camera. I tried my best to take it out, but it wasn't happening. It's a quarantine. My hair is a disaster. I need a haircut, among other things. Moving on. Okay, we got those stamps lined up, repositioning our cardstock, making sure it is in the top right-hand corner, condition our stamps, and then stamp. And now I'm using Jennycarddesigns Fresh Asparagus ink. And now here is where I forgot to remove the air bubbles. First, I dropped my ink pad on top of my cardstock, and it landed right square over the Q. I was so upset, and I thought, okay, it's just a letter Q, right? Not a big deal. We won't worry about it. I'll clean up any of that ink before it gets too crazy. And how often do I need the letter Q anyways? I thought I could live with it. So I inked up the stamp, and I forgot to remove the air bubbles. So that letter P ended up with a nice squishy green ink smudge. So I didn't want to throw it away. There were still too many good letters in here. I thought, okay, I'm just going to fix it. I'll remove my air bubble and make sure that we're ready to go for the next round. So the rest of the stamps turned out well. Make sure that you remove your air bubbles. Here is a look at the completed alpha layers. They are so fabulous and so elegant looking, and you can really change this up to so many different colors. So, okay, so what I've done now, I'm starting to die cut. I was very nervous because this was some serious stamping. I spent a lot of time stamping. So I cut out a blank template to try to sort of line up my alphabets to make sure they got cut out correctly, but it didn't work out. I was like, this is not working. So I took it away and I threw it off to the side, and I thought, let's just give it a go with the alphabets that I sort of messed up on with that Q and P. So I cut it out and it was okay. I was like, oh, okay, well, this is good. I didn't sort of ruin anything. So I was so insecure that the die wouldn't line up at this point because I had spent so much time. And I'd never cut out the letters before with the die, so I wasn't sure how it would line up. But it turned out great. Everything turned out lovely. And I have a ton of these gorgeous alphabets to make some beautiful cards with. Okay, here are the cards that I made using these letters. And now I'll just go through the process quite quickly just so that you get an idea of how I created these cards. So I keep all of my letters in a little pocket and I just sort of dump it out and take out whatever I need. And I also have this scrap alcohol inked background that I made and I just hadn't used yet. So I grabbed that, I grabbed some Altenew washi tape, a couple of card bases, and I just started to play around. So I chose some sentiments with my letters, and I'm going to start with that alcohol ink background. I've got it on some heavy stock Yupo paper, and I just cut that in half. So this panel will measure 3.5 by 5. So I'm taking the words hello, and I just want to make sure that they fit across that background. And then I grabbed a scrap of glitter cardstock that I have, and I just wanted a tiny little strip just to give sort of a grounding layer for my alphabet letters to sit on. So I glue that down using some Lawn Fawn liquid glue. I glue my little glitter strip down, and then I just trim off the excess, and then I use some tweezers and some liquid glue, and I adhere down the first and the last letter just to make sure that I get even spacing. So I go ahead and I glue down all my letters, spelling out hello. And then I just repositioned that O. I felt like it was up a little bit higher than the rest. So once I'm happy with that, I grab a little piece of white craft foam and I just cut a piece that measures the same size as my alcohol inked panel and use my liquid glue, adhered that to the panel, and then adhered everything to my card base. And then that's it for this card. Just a quick and simple hello card. I think there's so much going on that it doesn't really need anything else. So that's it for this card. Okay, moving on to project number 2. I'm going to take the word mother, make sure that it fits across my card base, and then I'm going to use this gorgeous Altenew washi tape. I'm going to cover the bottom half of my cardstock with it, and I also added some liquid glue as well to make sure that the washi tape doesn't peel up. I've never used this before. It's a new to me product, so I was kind of worried that it would peel up. So I went ahead, I glued that down, I trimmed off the excess, and then I used my bone folder to sort of help push that glue around so there wasn't any bubbles or anything weird, and make sure that everything is adhered and we have some good contact with a little bit of extra adhesive on the back so that that washi tape doesn't peel up. And then I grabbed a scrap of gold glitter cardstock and I just trimmed out a 3/4 inch piece and glued that above my washi tape. I kind of layered it over top the washi tape and to the card base to help create sort of like a seal, I guess, to make sure that everything stays in place. And then I trimmed off the excess. I went and I glued the letters to some plain die cuts that I had, some extra letters that I had die cut out. I adhered all of those down to my card, and starting with the beginning and the end, and then putting the rest of the letters to make sure everything is evenly spaced. And then I just felt like it needed a little bit more flashy purple. So I went and grabbed some foil cardstock that I have, and this is a purple foil. And I just took a little strip of that and I glued that down underneath the word mother, and I thought that was a nice finishing touch. I cut off the excess, and then that's it for this card. This card is complete. And we'll set that aside and move on to project number 3. Project number 3, I took a craft card base for this one, and I spelled out the word grateful. I had a few random scrap pieces of foil cardstock as well as some regular Gina K cardstock. And I think that's a wild lilac color. And I also had a few random die cuts left over from previous projects, and I thought the colors all matched nicely. So I glued down some gold cardstock, some purple foil, that Gina K wild lilac, and then I added in a little bit of green foil, and then adhered my 2 floral elements on top of the word grateful. And that flower, the daisy, comes from the Jennycarddesigns layered daisy, and then the lilac comes from the Altenew lavender bud. And then that's it for this card. So these are just some quick and simple card projects that I made just in a matter of minutes with those beautiful letters. I mean, this is so versatile. You can really change up the colors, create monogrammed stationery. There's just so much you can do with this stamp set. I am so in love with it. And I'm super happy that I picked it up. And if you make any projects for this, I would love to have you share them with me as well. You can add to Instagram. You can use the hashtag inspired by Jenny. I would love to see anything that you create. Don't forget to check out the Glitter and Ink store and use that promo code to get 10% off of your next order. And coming up on screen are a few videos that I think that you may enjoy. And thank you so much for spending some of your time with me here today. I appreciate all of the support. So have yourself a lovely day, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!